The wind carried grit and memory across the plains, brushing against the worn face of Silas Boone as he rode beneath a pale sky, his shoulders heavy with more than just dust. His coat, once chestnut brown, had faded to the color of storm clouds, frayed at the cuffs and darkened with time. Each step his horse took kicked up the kind of silence that followed a life too long untethered. Silas had once built dreams with calloused hands and a young wife who smelled like lilac and honey. Clara had laughed with her whole chest, fed him bread she made from scratch, held him when the weight of cattle, weather, and men grew too much. Fever took her fast. By the time Silas could ride for the doctor, she was already cooling in their shared bed. No children had ever come. Just land, wind, and the gnawing emptiness of too many seasons passing without another voice in the house. After Clara, he stopped speaking unless necessity demanded it. The ranch withered, his horses sold one by one, and the town of Willow Bend soon learned to look away when Silas walked past. Folks said he was cursed, asterisk the widowmaker, asterisk some called him. He never corrected them. What truth was there to defend? When the last winter storm split the barn roof clean in two and left his firewood soaked to rot, he didn't patch it. He simply saddled his horse, rolled a blanket, and left. He told no one where he was headed. He didn't know himself. 3 days later, his canteen nearly dry and his boots beginning to split at the soles, he spotted smoke trailing into the afternoon sky. A lone homestead stood at the edge of a dry creek, barely holding on to its shape, weather-beaten walls, porch slanting, curtains drawn. But it stood. That was more than most things did anymore. In the yard, 2 women labored under the sun. One swung an axe with steady, practiced rhythm, sending chips flying in precise arcs. The other hung laundry on a crooked line, her sleeves rolled, her gaze darting toward the road as Silas approached. Neither looked fragile. Neither looked welcoming. He stopped 20 feet from the gate and tipped his hat. "Ain't here for trouble," he said, voice dry as the dust on his lips. "Just need a place to rest a night." "I'll work for it." They exchanged a glance that said more than words could. The one with the axe lowered it slowly, brushing her forearm across her brow. "You got a name?" she asked. "Silas Boone," he answered. "You drink?" "Not anymore." "Steal?" "No, ma'am." The other woman stepped forward then, her eyes softer, cautious but not cruel. "We got a spare cot in the smokehouse. You fix that front fence and split the rest of the wood. You can stay till sundown tomorrow." He nodded, dismounted, and got to work. The one with the axe was June Carlyle, widowed 3 winters past. Her husband had died in a flash flood trying to save their mule. She never remarried. Said men were like dry rivers, unreliable and loud when full. The second woman, Emmeline Voss, had been left behind by a traveling peddler who took her savings and disappeared into Colorado. She had a son but didn't speak of the father. Neither woman seemed impressed by Silas, but neither turned him away. That first night, he ate beans in silence on the back steps while inside the house flickered with candlelight and quiet conversation. He heard the boy, Tommy, asking questions, laughter from Emmeline, a soft hum from June. He didn't approach. It wasn't his place. The next morning, he rose before the sun, already swinging the axe when June stepped out with her coffee. She didn't speak, just left a mug near his boots and walked back inside. It became routine. He stayed a second night, then a third. No one said he could, but no one told him to go. He fixed the roof of the smokehouse, built a new chicken coop with leftover lumber, taught Tommy how to mend a leather strap. On his 4th trip into town, Silas noticed the whispers. At first just glances, then smirks. Men leaning against doorframes. Women murmuring behind gloved hands. At the general store, the shopkeeper made a show of counting his coins. "Roughing it with 2 lonely ladies, huh?" he said, loud enough for the other customers to hear. Silas didn't respond. He simply took the flour and coffee and left. The next morning, he found a torn scrap nailed to the gate. "Sinners breed sin." He offered to leave again that night. said it quiet while sitting on the porch. June didn't look up from her stitching. If we sent every good man packing because cowards couldn't mind their own, we'd all be buried by now. That was the closest thing to kindness he'd heard in years. Still, the unease grew. When Emmeline went to town for lamp oil, someone spat near her boot. June's eggs were refused at the market. And always, the glances, sharp, pitying, smug. Tommy didn't notice. To him, Silas was the man who taught him how to ride bareback, who could name every kind of bird just by its song. The boy followed him like a shadow, asking questions, mimicking his walk. Emmeline watched with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She had loved once, and it had ruined her. Late one evening, as the wind carried a storm smell across the plains, a rider appeared from the east. Silas was mucking the stables when he heard the hooves. He stepped out, shovel still in hand. The man on the horse had snake eyes and a smile that didn't match. He dismounted like someone who thought the earth owed him something. "Emmeline," he called, his voice coated in whiskey and dust. "Ain't you gonna say hello?" Emmeline stepped onto the porch, arms crossed tight. She didn't look surprised. Only tired. "Judd," she said, her voice level. "You've got no place here." "I came for my boy," he sneered, spitting into the dirt. "And maybe a bit of what's mine." Silas stepped forward, placing himself between Judd and the porch. He didn't say a word. Just stood there, solid as a stone post. Judd laughed. "So this is your new man? Look at you, collectin' strays now?" No one moved. "You touch this land again," June said from the doorway, rifle resting casual in her arms, "I'll bury you in it." Judd's eyes flicked between them, calculating. Then, with a scowl, he mounted his horse and rode off without another word. But he'd be back. That night, Silas sat under the stars, the taste of old fears rising like bile. He stared out over the fence he'd mended, the fields he'd helped till. There was a feeling growing here, quiet and slow like water beneath cracked earth. A longing not for passion, but for place. For belonging. He hadn't expected to care. But he did. And now the wind carried more than dust. It carried a promise that the past wasn't done with them yet. The days that followed were quiet in the way a field feels just before lightning strikes, still, almost sacred. Silas rose each morning to the sound of chickens clucking and wind pushing gently through prairie grass. The rhythm of the place settled into him like a second skin. He repaired a broken gate latch, sharpened tools, tilled soil with Tommy at his side. The work gave shape to time. He didn't speak much, but the others began to understand him without words. Emmeline was the first to offer more than simple tasks. She handed him a book one morning, an old volume of poems with frayed corners. "Found this in the attic," she said, eyes avoiding his. "Figured you might like something that don't rust." Silas took it with a small nod. That night, after the lamps were dimmed and the air cooled, she passed by the smokehouse and saw him reading by lanternlight, lips moving silently. June remained guarded, but her glances softened. When Silas cut his hand mending a wire fence, she cleaned the wound with rough tenderness, wrapping it tight. "Next time wear gloves," she said. But her voice lacked the edge it once carried. The town's judgment didn't fade. If anything, it thickened. One morning, Emmeline returned from the market with a bruised cheek and trembling hands. "Someone shoved me," she said, voice brittle. "Called me a whore." She didn't cry, only scrubbed her face hard with the dish rag as if to erase the moment. Silas stood behind her, unmoving. That night, he saddled the old mule and rode into town under cover of dusk. He returned before dawn, his knuckles raw and jaw tight. No one asked where he went, but the next time Emmeline walked through the general store, no one dared speak. Still, the threat of Judd Carver hung like a storm cloud, swollen and dark on the horizon. Emmeline began checking the locks twice before bed. June kept her rifle closer. Tommy, sensing unease, stopped asking to ride into the hills. Silas didn't speak of it, but every night before he extinguished his lantern, he cleaned his old revolver in silence. When Judd came again, he didn't knock. It was near midnight. The crickets had gone still, and a dry wind howled against the eaves. Silas was awake, a knot coiled in his gut. The sound of hooves in the distance stirred him to his feet. He stepped out onto the porch, just as the gate creaked open. Judd dismounted with a drunken sway, eyes glowing with something sour and mean. A bottle dangled from one hand, the other rested too casually near his belt. "Thought I'd pay my respects," he slurred, stepping closer. "Heard you all got yourself a little family out here. Ain't that sweet?" Emmeline appeared behind Silas, her face pale but steady. "You need to leave, Judd." Judd's eyes narrowed. "Don't talk to me like that. I gave you a boy. I own a piece of this place." "No," Silas said, stepping off the porch, placing himself between them again. "You gave her nothing but fear." Judd's laugh cracked through the silence. "So the mute has a mouth after all. What are you gonna do, Boone? Preach me to death?" Silas didn't answer. He simply stood, hands loose at his sides, eyes steady. June emerged from the doorway, rifle already raised, but Silas lifted a hand to stop her. "This one's mine," he said. Judd rushed him like a wounded animal. The first blow was wild, catching Silas's shoulder. The second missed entirely. Silas took the hits without flinching, then struck back. 1, 2, clean and hard. Judd staggered, bleeding from the lip, eyes wild. They fought without words, the way men do when words have failed too many times. Fists met bone, knees hit dirt, breath came ragged. Tommy watched from behind the curtain, wide-eyed and silent. Emmeline pressed her hand to her chest, as if to steady her own heart. Silas didn't fight to win, he fought to end it. When Judd finally collapsed into the dust, groaning and cursing, Silas stood over him. Blood trickled from his own mouth, but his eyes were calm. He reached down and picked up Judd's revolver, emptied the bullets one by one, and tossed them into the dark. "Next time," he said, voice low and grave, "you won't walk away." Judd spat into the dirt, but didn't argue. He limped to his horse and mounted with effort, glaring back once before riding off into the blackness. No one moved until his figure vanished completely. The silence that followed was thick with more than relief. It was the kind of stillness that only comes after something ugly has been burned out. Later, Silas sat on the porch, bruised and bleeding, but strangely weightless. Emmeline brought a cloth and knelt beside him, dabbing gently at his cheek. "Why didn't you just shoot him?" she asked softly. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because I ain't that man anymore." She nodded, her hand still resting against his face. In that moment, something between them changed, not loudly, not visibly. But it settled like dust after thunder. In the following weeks, no one saw Judd again. Rumors drifted that he'd left for Kansas or been arrested in Nebraska. Emmeline stopped locking the doors twice. June began planting tomatoes. Tommy laughed more. Silas moved his things into the main house, not out of ceremony, but necessity. When the roof of the smokehouse began to sag, June pointed toward the spare room without a word. He slept there from then on, the scent of wood smoke and sage thick in the air. They didn't speak of what they were. There was no talk of love, no confessions beneath the stars. But in the way June passed him coffee before sunrise, in the way Emmeline laid a quilt over him when he dozed by the fire, in the way Tommy called him Pa without thinking, they became something real. One day, while whittling beneath the elm, Silas looked up and watched the boy race across the yard, chasing a stray chicken. Emmeline laughed from the porch. June stood by the garden, sleeves rolled, dirt under her nails. And he realized, with a quiet swell of something tender, that he had not only returned to life, he had stepped into something better. Not a second chance, a first one, the one he never thought he deserved. He rose slowly, knees aching, and walked toward them, not because he had to, but because he belonged. And for the first time in years, the wind didn't carry regret. It carried home.